Galactic Council decided to banish Earth. Completely, humanity grinned and walked away. The gavel came down before Sarin. Vass reached the center of the floor. High Arbiter Voxelin did not wait for her to settle. He did not offer her seat. He did not acknowledge her arrival. With even a nod, he simply opened the charged document on his platform and began reading, his voice flat and deliberate, carrying through the grand convocation hall as though the outcome had been written before the doors ever opened. 3,000 alien delegates filled the hall. It had been built into the orbital station above Vareth Prime, a structure older than most civilizations currently. Seated in its galleries, the ceiling stretched so high that its upper galleries disappeared into artificial cloud. Every curving ring of seating was filled with a representative from one of the 312 member species of the Galactic Compact. Every shape, size, and color of intelligent life the galaxy had so far produced sat in polished order, looking down at the one human woman standing alone on the floor below. Sarin Vass was 44 years old, tall and composed, in a plain navy uniform with no decoration except the small silver pin of Earth's diplomatic corps on her collar. She had a data pad tucked under one arm. She looked like someone who had stopped by on her way somewhere else. Vox Solon read the charges without looking at her. Humanity had colonized 47 star systems in under 200 years of interstellar travel. The previous record belonged to the Kree Dominion, who had managed 9 in the same time frame. Humanity had joined the Galactic Compact, agreed to its terms, signed every relevant treaty, and then expanded at a rate that the Compact had no historical framework to process. 3 of the largest trade guilds had watched their monopolies dissolve as human merchant vessels entered their markets and sold comparable goods at prices no established supplier could match. In some sectors, the price differences had reached 40% or more. Then came the incident near the Harrow corridor. A border dispute had escalated into a military engagement between a human patrol fleet and a Kree battle group. The Kree fielded 3 vessels for everyone on the human side. They were an ancient military force with centuries of documented engagements behind them. The battle lasted 11 hours. The Kree lost 4 ships and withdrew. The human fleet filed a brief incident report and returned to its patrol route. Then came the patents. Human engineers, through entirely legal licensing agreements, had accessed dozens of council-certified technologies, spent years studying them, and began selling improved versions at a fraction of the original price. Manufacturers who had held those patents for generations found themselves unable to compete. Their complaints to the council had been loud and sustained. Then came the matter that had no single name but troubled the Compact most. Human ships had been visiting the outer worlds, the small species, the overlooked ones, the ones who existed technically within the Compact but had received very little from it. Humans arrived at these worlds carrying medical supplies, engineering knowledge, and trade agreements that had no debt layers built into them. It was not against any law, but it had a direction to it, a clear purpose that Vox Solon could see, even when he could not cite it as a violation. He turned the last page of the chart document and set it down. The vote had been taken the previous day, 289 in favor, 23 against, effective immediately. Earth and all systems under Human control were to be removed from all council star charts, all official trade networks, and all diplomatic recognition. No council member state would be permitted to maintain formal relations with any human government or colony. Humanity's legal status within council space would be that of an unrecognized civilization. No protections, no recourse, no seat at any table, alone. Completely and officially alone. Voxelin looked at Sarin Voss directly for the first time. She had not moved during the entire reading. She stood with her weight slightly on her left foot, data pad tucked under her arm, expression completely calm. This was the moment Vox Solon had presided over many times in his 60 years behind that platform, the moment when a representative understood what had just been taken from their species. He had watched proud ambassadors argue, plead, and fall into stunned silence in this hall. He had seen the full range of what a sentient being looked like when the weight of genuine isolation settled on them. He waited for Sarin Voss to feel that weight. She looked down at her data pad. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked up and she was smiling. Not a polite smile, not a performance. Real one, the kind that starts somewhere deep and works its way up before a person can do anything about it. She straightened her collar with one hand. She said 7 words. Thank you. We were hopping you would. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Her steps were steady and unhurried on the polished floor. She did not look back. She did not pause. She crossed that hall with the calm stride of someone who had just received exactly the news they came for. The doors closed behind her. Not one of 3,000 delegates made a sound. Voxen stared at the closed doors for a long time. He was aware of the silence around him. He was aware that he had just presided over what was supposed to be a demonstration of institutional authority, and that somehow, without raising her voice or making a single argument, the human had walked out of it, looking like the one who had won. A cold and unwelcome thought began forming at the back of his mind. He did not examine it. He set it aside firmly. He would not think about it again for 8 months. Then he would think about almost nothing else. Marin Ashiro received the confirmation signal at 14:07 Earth Standard Time. She read it, set her tea on the desk, and opened the master coordination file she had been building for 11 years. The message she sent to 47 colony governors contained 4 words. They voted yes. Begin. Then she went back to work. Her assistant, Owen Clark, had been standing near the window when the signal came through. He was 26, recently assigned to the Department of Expansion, and perceptive enough to know when he was missing something important. We just got removed from the largest political alliance in the galaxy, he said carefully, and your response is 4 words. 11 years of preparation, Marin said, without looking up from her screen. 4 words are just the final part. Owen sat down and waited. The Galactic Council's fundamental error had been one of attention. When humanity arrived in the compact 200 years ago, the Council had formed an opinion in the first 50 years and stopped updating it. Humans were impulsive, loud, disruptive, driven by short-term ambition. The assessment had felt accurate at the time. It had also been completely wrong. The 47 colonies were the first proof of that. From the outside, they had looked exactly like the undisciplined expansion the Council expected from a young Species still excited about interstellar travel. In reality, every single system had been selected from a strategic document that Earth's Department of Expansion had been quietly refining before humanity launched its first faster-than-light vessel. Each colony served a specific and deliberate purpose within a larger design that no individual piece revealed on its own. Heron's world in the cold outer belt sat above a rare metal deposit that no council survey had ever properly catalogued. Its governor, Fletcher Dane, had spent 11 years building extraction infrastructure in a landscape most council species would have labeled uninhabitable. 3 systems away, the Delhi colonies ran shipyards capable of producing a medium-class vessel every 18 days, positioned behind a cluster of unremarkable asteroids that did not appear on any standard navigation file. The agricultural colonies of the Sarin chain could feed a population of 4 billion indefinitely without a single supply line touching council distribution networks. Communication relay stations spread across the midrim formed a complete independent grid that used none of the compact's infrastructure. Every piece had been placed with intention. Every governor had been given their part of the plan and trusted to hold it. We spent 200 years studying them, Marin told Owen, still reading her screen. Every alliance, every dependency, every place where one compact member owed a favor to another and would never say so publicly. We watched their economy, the way an engineer studies a machine before deciding whether to repair it or build a better one. Owen leaned forward slightly. The trade guild disruptions, those were not accidents, they were tests, Marin confirmed. Each time our merchants entered a market and dropped prices, we recorded who panicked, who adapted, who went to the arbitration courts, and who made private calls to senior council members instead. Over 40 years, we produced a complete map of every pressure point in their economic structure, every vulnerability, every dependency they pretended did not exist. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then the energy patents. The energy situation was the piece Marin valued most, not for its brilliance but for its patience. For 60 years, human ships had purchased fuel from the Ver Consortium, the Compact's largest and most politically connected energy supplier. The invoices were large, the payments were consistent. To any observer, it looked like straightforward reliance. Had not been. 12 years ago, physicist Lena Farrow and her research team had completed a breakthrough in compact fusion generation that made Varic fuel technologically obsolete. The discovery had been tested, verified quietly, installed across every human vessel and colony built in the following decade, and kept entirely off any public record that Council intelligence services might access. Earth continued purchasing Varic fuel throughout this period, not out of need, out of discretion. Stopping abruptly would have told the Compact that something had changed. The invoices kept arriving, the payments kept going out, the fuel went into storage. The moment the banishment vote was confirmed, a single file went live on an open broadcast signal. It contained the complete documentation of Lena Farrow's fusion technology, tested specifications, implementation guides, full schematics, no license fees, no purchase required, free to anyone in the galaxy who wanted it. By the time Voxen finished the closing procedures of his Session 17 species had already downloaded the full archive. By the end of the week, the Varick Consortium's valuation had dropped by more than half and was still falling. Owen absorbed this for a moment. We gave it away, we released it. Marin said we could have built our own energy monopoly and replaced the one we destroyed. We did not do that. The species who needed that technology most were the small ones, the ones who had been paying ver prices for a century because they had no alternative. Now they have one. The fourth layer of the plan was quieter than the others, but in many ways more significant. The human visits to the outer worlds, which had appeared in the Council's charged documents as a vague concern about influence, have been operating for 30 years through Earth's outreach program, medical assistance, agricultural guidance, engineering, knowledge, all of it shared without the debt structures built into standard compact trade agreements. The species who received it had not been asked for anything in return. They had been treated as equals over 30 years of consistent treatment that built something specific. It built trust. On Harren's world, Fletcher Dane read the forward message, stood up from his desk and walked out to the observation deck of the administration building. The amber sky above the settlement was streaked with the running lights of construction vehicles working across the ridge. He had governed this cold, mineral-smelling rock for 11 years, holding his piece of a plan whose full shape he had only ever seen in outline. He could see all of it. Now he went back inside and began making calls across 46 other star systems in shipyards and research stations and quiet administrative offices. People who had spent years as individual pieces of something larger were finally seeing the whole design. They were not celebrating. There was no time for that. Each of them understood, without needing to be told, that the plan was now in a phase where every hour mattered. They had prepared for 200 years. Now they were going to show the galaxy what that preparation had been. For 8 months after the banishment, Vox Solon received the report that replaced the cold thought with a cold certainty. The Council had expected a particular sequence of events after the vote. They had discussed it in closed session, the senior members and their advisors sitting around tables that had hosted centuries of decisions. The consensus had been straightforward. Humanity was dependent on compact infrastructure in ways that would become undeniable once removed from it. Trade networks ran through Council relay stations. Financial instruments were denominated in compact recognized currencies. Border security in contested regions existed partly because compact law created a framework that discouraged larger powers from moving against smaller ones. Remove all of that, the thinking went, and reality would arrive. Quickly, the reality that arrived was not the one they had anticipated. After 3 months of complete silence from Earth, the Council's economic analysts had begun revising their projections. After 5 months, the revisions became less confident. After 8 months, Vox Solon read a report from his senior intelligence coordinator, Petra Hold, careful and experienced officer who used precise language and whose reports were therefore alarming when they contained phrases like material miscalculation. Our original assessment. The report was 12 pages long. He read it twice. 14 species along the outer rim had stopped responding to standard Council communications, not with declarations or protests. They had simply not replied when council, diplomatic vessels arrived at several of these worlds to request meetings. They were received politely and informed that the governments in question had entered a new trade arrangement and were reviewing their existing commitments before scheduling further discussions. The arrangement was called the Accord. Its founding member was Earth. The Accord had no central bureaucracy and no single home system. It operated through a distributed network of direct agreements, each one negotiated between members without an intermediary body setting the terms. There were no mandatory dues, no compulsory votes. There was a shared commitment to mutual defense and a shared resource network, which after considerable analytical difficulty, Petra Holt's team had determined was already larger than the Compact's outer rim infrastructure in three key categories: energy supply, food distribution, and medical technology. The medical archive was the piece that had spread fastest. 6 weeks after the banishment, a second open broadcast had carried a complete library of human medical research translated into 42 languages. It covered treatments for conditions that compact medicine had never prioritized because the species affected by them were small and economically inconsequential. On some outer worlds, the archive had reached practicing medical centers within days of the broadcast. The effects were already measurable. Voxelin set the report down and sat very still. His aide Carol then knocked once and entered without waiting, which she reserved for matters that could not be delayed. She placed a data chip on his desk. He picked it up. It contained a copy of a research paper published on the same open channel as Lena Farrow's patent archive. The paper had been available for 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, it had been downloaded by research institution across 118 species home systems. The paper was a detailed technical analysis of the compact's economic structure. It identified with clear methodology and careful citations every major point of dependency within the compact's financial framework. It showed which members genuinely benefited from their relationships with others and which relationships had been constructed over decades through slow leverage until smaller members found themselves unable to disagree with larger ones without risking their own economic stability. It was not an accusation. It made no demands. It simply presented the information and let the numbers speak. They spoke loudly. There is more, Carol said. He looked up. They are building something in the outer reach. Long range observation assets have tracked construction activity in a system designated 07719 for approximately 3 months. Initially, the scale appeared consistent with a standard outpost. It is no longer consistent with that. She brought up the scan on the wall display. Voxelin studied it in silence. Whatever was being constructed in 07719 was enormous, larger than any single structure currently in existence in compact space. The construction fleet alone, visible at the edges of the scan, numbered over 200 vessels working in coordinated phases. Even from this observational distance, the deliberateness of the construction was clear. This was not improvised. This had been planned in detail long before it began. Can we get closer? He asked. Human patrol vessels are present in the area, Carol said. They have not challenged our observation ships. They allow them to remain at their current distance and simply watch them. Vox Solon had the sudden and uncomfortable impression that the humans, watching those observation ships, knew exactly what was being recorded and felt no concern about it whatsoever. He stood and walked to the window. Prime turned below, its blue and green surface unchanged and indifferent to everything happening in its orbit. How many species are in the Accord? He asked. Carol checked her screen. 14 full members, 11 in active negotiation, 6 sending observers without formal commitment, 31 in various stages, and 8 months with no headquarters, no political history, no centuries of institutional credibility behind it. Sir, Carol said with the particular tone she used when delivering something she was not sure how to frame. 3 of our own member species have submitted quiet inquiries about dual membership, not about leaving the compact, about whether joining the Accord simultaneously would conflict with existing treaty language. The cold thought came back fully, and without room to push it away again. He had stood in the convocation hall and watched Sarin Vass smile and say 7 words and walk out. He had decided the smile was a performance. He had been wrong, and the scale of that wrongness was now becoming clear. It was not a small error of judgment. It was a foundational misread of what humanity had been doing for 200 years, of what that woman had known when she straightened her collar, of what those 7 words had actually meant. Pull every analyst available, he said quietly. I want a full structural picture of the Accord within a week. Trade flows, energy independence, military capacity, everything. Carol left. He stayed at the window for a long time. He thought about 7 words, spoken without hesitation in a silent hall. He thought about a species that had known on that day exactly where they were going when they left. He thought about how long they must have been walking toward it before anyone thought to look. The system humanity called the Reach had no name in any council star chart. It appeared in human records that way because it sat at the farthest extent of inhabited space, belonging to no species and claimed by no government. 3 years before the banishment vote, a quiet survey team led by engineer D.O. ADO had arrived there on a research vessel with minimal crew and spent 4 months measuring everything. D.O. had chosen the site herself. She had written the proposal, run the numbers, and argued for it in front of the expansion committee with the kind of directness that either impressed a room or irritated it. The committee had been impressed on the 3rd revision. Site was approved. Now she stood on the primary construction platform of Hearthpoint Station, watching 8 separate assembly crews work across a structure already larger than anything she had personally built, and she felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel during an active project: confidence that they would actually finish in time. Platform 7 is 2 days behind, said her Deputy Grace Hall, reading from the construction log as they walked. The secondary support frame needed redesigning after the last expansion. Approval. Additional crew shift. D.O. said, I want Platform 7 current by the end of the week. Grace made a note. They delegation arrives in 6 days. I know. They were among the first species to formally commit to the Accord, and their Ambassador Thresh had requested a personal tour of Hearthpoint before his government signed the defense clause. He wanted to see with his own eyes what was being built. D.O. understood that Entirely, she would have wanted the same. Thresh arrived precisely on schedule. He was short by most species standards, with large light-sensitive eyes and a thoughtful habit of going completely still when processing something significant. Dio met him at the docking platform and walked with him. Personally, he moved through Hearthpoint for 4 hours and said very little. He asked specific technical questions about the distributed power system and the medical facility. He examined the docking configuration and the Parliament chamber under construction. He stood for a long time at the main observation window, watching the assembly crews work on the outer ring against the dark. Eventually he said, "You designed this without a throne room." Dio considered the observation. "We did not need one. Every major political structure I have visited," Thresh said slowly, "has a room where the most powerful party sits above the others. Sometimes it is obvious. Sometimes it is designed to appear subtle, but it is always present." He looked around the corridor. "This station does not have that. The Parliament chamber has a circular floor plan," Dio said, "every seat at the same level." Thresh was quiet for a moment. "My people have been inside the compact for 80 years. In 80 years, no representative of a senior compact species sat at the same level as us in a formal meeting." Dio had no answer that would improve on that. She did not try to find one. They kept walking. 3 weeks after the visit, they signed the full Accord membership agreement. Their accompanying statement was brief. It said they had examined Hearthpoint Station and believed it to be a place where their voice would carry the same weight as any other. The Council's response arrived shortly after. A formal envoy appeared at the edge of the reach system in a diplomatic vessel accompanied by a military escort. It made no effort to conceal the envoy. A senior official named Rael was experienced enough to project authority, even when uncertain of his footing. He was received calmly by Commander Cole Harrard, who commanded the human patrol fleet in the area. Cole offered Rael a meeting room, a meal, and a copy of the Accord's founding charter. Then he listened without interruption to the Council's formal statement that the Accord represented a destabilizing element in recognized space and that its defense provisions were inconsistent with existing compact law. When Rael finished, Cole slid a sealed document across the table. Rael opened it. It was 60 pages long. Its title was plain, a technical assessment of Council fleet doctrine. The document was thorough and precise. It identified the tactical vulnerabilities in current Council military formations using historical engagement data from the past 40 years. It examined supply line fragility and communication lag in extended operations. Its final section contained projected outcomes under a range of escalation scenarios. Every figure was cited, every conclusion was supported. It contained no threats, it made no demands, it stated no intentions. Cole held Rael's gaze steadily. "We wanted the Council to have complete information before any decisions were made. Consider it a courtesy." Rael took the document back to his vessel. He read it twice during the return journey. His report to the Council was direct. The military path was not viable. The Senior Defense Committee reviewed the assessment independently and reached the same conclusion within 2 days. The ultimatum was quietly set aside. No announcement accompanied the decision. The escort Vessels returned to their regular routes. Without comment on Hearth Point's primary platform, Dio stood and watched. A Vanny cargo ship dock alongside a human supply vessel and an Orin research craft, 3 species of the same station, working the same day with no senior partner setting the conditions for any of them. She thought about the years it had taken to reach this precise moment. She thought about the survey team, the cold months in the reach system, the proposal she had argued 3 times in front of a committee asking very hard questions. Then Grace called her with the latest build reports and Dio went back to work. Platform 7 came in on schedule. Hearthbond Station was complete on a Tuesday, not with ceremony, not with a symbolic final bolt. The last structural certification came back clear, the final systems check passed without flags, and Dioyo reviewed the completed checklist. At her desk, set it down, said right. Then to the empty room and began the pre-event inspection. The founding ceremony of the Accord of Free Worlds was scheduled for 3 days. Later, 31 species had signed full membership agreements, 7 more were present as confirmed observers, their representatives already aboard and moving through Hearthpunt's corridors with the slightly stunned look of people who had expected the station to feel less real than it did. The medical bay was handling 17 active cases from 4 different species. The engineering exchange program had its first joint team running. Humans, Vanny, and 2 or specialists working on an improved atmospheric processor design that none of them could have produced independently. The Parliament chamber was finished. Circular floor, equal seats, no elevated platform for a presiding power to look down from. Sarin Voss had reviewed it. The afternoon before the ceremony, she stood at the center of the room alone. For a few minutes not moving, she had last stood at the center of a room like this in the convocation hall, surrounded by 3,000 delegates who had come to watch her species be cut off from the galaxy. She stood now in a room designed so that no one would ever stand at its center. Alone, she stayed there quietly for a while, then she went to prepare her remarks in a private office on the council station above Verth Prime, Vox. Solon had routed the ceremonies broadcast to a personal screen through channel not listed in his official schedule. He watched the gathering crowd on Hearthpoint's main concourse, a mix of species moving through wide, well-lit corridors with the easy familiarity of people who had been using the space long enough to stop being self-conscious in it. The broadcast cut between angles, showing the exterior of the station, enormous and lit against the black of deep space, the outer hull still bearing the clean marks of recent construction. The docking bays were full. The Parliament chamber was filling with representatives of 31 worlds. Carol knocked and entered. "You are watching it," she said without particular judgment. "Yes," he said. She sat down in the chair across from his desk. He did not comment on it. They watched together. Sarin Voss took the center of the Parliament floor. She waited until the room was fully quiet. She wore the same navy uniform she had worn in the convocation hall, the same small silver pin on her collar. She looked out at 31 delegations and briefly at the broadcast lens. She spoke without notes. She said the Accord had not been built in reaction to anything. It had been built because a different kind of relationship between intelligent species was possible, and making it real required someone to start building it. She said the Accord had no intention of becoming what the compact was, a body where older members set terms for younger ones, where size determined voice, and where stability was maintained by making the cost of disagreement too high for smaller species to afford. She said the Accord would make mistakes, she was certain of it, but the structure was designed to survive mistakes because no single voice held enough power to make an error the others could not correct. She said the door was open, it would remain open. Then she sat down. Voxen watched the Parliament chamber respond. It was not the rehearsed noise of a staged occasion, it was the sound a room produces when people have heard something they were not certain they would ever hear. Genuine, unrushed building from several places at once. 3 more of our member species have submitted formal inquiries about dual membership, Carol said quietly. The language is careful, but the direction is clear. Voxen nodded. He had received those inquiries that morning. There would be more. The direction of the number was not difficult to read. The council was not ending. He understood that clearly, and it was important to understand it clearly. The compact was not dissolving or collapsing. It would continue, but it was for the first time in its entire history competing for relevance. It would have to explain itself to members who now had an alternative. It would have to justify its fee structures to species who had just watched 31 others build an arrangement with no fees and no dominant partners. It would have to earn loyalty. It had previously assumed change or shrink, those were the options. Slowly, without drama, if the council did not adapt. Vox Solon thought about the day he had read Sarin Voss the charges. He thought about the smile again. He had studied those 7 words many times in the past year. He had analyzed them for strategy and hidden intent. He had finally reached a conclusion he did not particularly enjoy. The words had contained neither of those things. They were simply true. Humanity had wanted the compact to make that vote, not from hostility, not from a desire to replace the council. They had needed the freedom that only complete separation could provide. They had needed space to build without requesting permission at every stage. The banishment designed as a punishment had been the one thing humanity could not have arranged for itself. The council had arranged it for them, he said to Carol, and to no one in particular. We should have asked her why she was smiling that day in the hall. That was the moment. If we had stopped and asked that single question, we might have understood what we were actually voting on. Carol did not respond. She was watching the broadcast. The camera had pulled back to show Hearthpoint from outside, lit from within, the windows of its corridors and chambers glowing warm against the dark of the reach, surrounded by the docked vessels of 31 species. Construction was still visible on the outer ring. It was still growing. It would keep growing. Beyond the station at some distance, a small orange transport vessel floated in quiet observation of the ceremony. On its observation deck, a young Orin girl had her face pressed against the viewport, watching the lights of Hearthpoint burn. In the dark, she had never been this far from home. She had spent an hour looking at the station and running out of ways to describe how large it was. She pulled back from the viewport and looked up at her father. What are they building? She asked. Her father watched the lights. For a moment, the outer ring was still under construction, workers visible even From this distance, moving through the lit spaces between frameworks in the careful, coordinated way of people who had been working together long enough to trust each other. A door, he said, quietly, for anyone who wants to walk. Through it, she turned back to the viewport. The lights of Hearthpoint burned steady and warm against the dark. They were still building.